Welcome to Vocatio Talks. This is a webinar we do during the off week, or for some, if you're in 0 week, if you're about to start classes, where we try to talk about the connection between work and faith. And every time we do this, we come up with a different theme. And so we've talked about rest, we've talked about what we mean when we say vocational formation. We've covered a number of different topics, finding God in the details. And so tonight we're gonna talk some. I'll probably take 12 to 15 minutes, and then we'll have an opportunity for you to ask questions and for me to respond. For most of you, you should be able to look at the bottom of your screen, your Zoom meeting. There's going to be a Q&A. If you have a question that crops up while I'm talking, go ahead and fill it out. You can also put it in the chat that we have going. Sometimes if there's lots of conversations going on, those get buried. But we'll see if we have any questions. And worst case scenario, we'll be out of here at 7:30. So welcome. Really grateful that you all took the time to be here this evening. So we find ourselves in a new year. Happy New Year, by the way. And January is the time for New Year's resolutions, right? They are a fairly big thing. We make promises to be better people. Maybe we want to lose weight. Maybe we want to drink less alcohol or drink less pop or soda or Coke, whichever part of the country you're from. Maybe you want to cut back on screen time. Maybe you want to find ways to or deeply connect with church or faith community, find ways to more deeply embed your life. Maybe you want to try to pursue greater practices of prayer, or try to be a better parent or a spouse. Many, if not all of us, have at one time in our life tried New Year's resolutions, right? And the problem with New Year's resolutions is that they tend not to last. The habits or practices that we try to overcome, they didn't get there overnight. And the stamina and the courage to overcome these things, to develop new practices or new habits, is a really hard thing to maintain, right? So eating healthier, it is the most common New Year's resolution, right? Perhaps eating healthier becomes too exhausting. And one night we give in and we have an extra scoop of ice cream, or for me, we eat the whole bag of potato chips. And we feel like a failure, and so we just give up, and slowly but surely we throw it out the window. Or maybe a hard situation at work or a hard situation at home sort of pushes us back to old habits of disconnecting. We go back to old habits of coping. We watch the screen and we turn on the TV and we just tune out. We decide that a couple of drinks couldn't hurt us. Or maybe it becomes too hard because you don't have the support of the people around you. So you made a commitment to be a better you, but the people in your life don't feel the need to hold the same commitments. And so all alone, you trudge this journey of trying to be a better you, but without others to join in that commitment, it's just easier to give up. And then 9 or 10 months later, 1 year will come to an end, and another comes crashing along, and you think, okay, this year I'm going to do it. I know last year I didn't do it, but this year I'm going to do it. And then we do this year after year, right? Rinse and repeat. So I don't want to talk about a New Year's resolution, but I do want to talk about an ancient practice for a new year. And it's been around forever. And yet I think it is a life-changing practice that has deep implications for life and for our work. And I'm talking about the ancient practice of hospitality. So first, I want us to try to frame the word hospitality. If you can, in your chat, when you hear the word hospitality, what comes to mind? In a simple word or a sentence, let's see how you respond. When you hear the word hospitality, what comes to mind? Let's see what your responses are. Graciousness, friendliness, welcomed, love, manners, entertain, kindness, the act of making someone feel like they're at home, good, serving, being nice to others, selfless and friendly, welcoming, loving, serving. Okay, so we're getting some themes here. Family, hosting others. Okay, good, 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 good. One of the things that's striking to me when the word hospitality comes up, particularly in the context that we find ourselves in Western civilization, is we often think of the hospitality industry, right? Hotels, hospitality is connected to food and our drinks being full and comfort of a physical space. One of the interesting things is that there's a difference between being hospitable and being a good host or being a good hostess. Let me give an example. So, my wife and I had dear friends when we lived in Seattle, and she would often talk about this gift of hospitality that she had. And she was one of the most gracious people I ever knew. She's always has people in her home. She was a great cook. Your glass was always full of whatever it was you were drinking. She was always made sure that you were comfortable. She was a really, really amazing host. But she also was a highly anxious person and really angry about a number of different things. And so, if a conversation went in a direction where she felt uncomfortable, her anxiety would rise. She would become angry and opinionated to the point where you were just terrified to be honest around her. You were terrified to sort of disclose how you really felt. So, even though she was an amazing host, making sure that we were well fed and we had plenty to drink, there wasn't an opportunity that you felt like you could be yourself. So Henry Nouwen defines hospitality as this. He says, hospitality is creating space for others to be fully themselves. So hospitality is that space where you seek wholeness on behalf of others, right? And this is why food is almost always involved and very central to the practice of hospitality, because it's impossible to be whole, to attend to the whole person when you're hungry. But hospitality isn't simply limited to hunger or the physical space around us. Hospitality is a space where our physical and emotional and spiritual wholeness may be addressed. So, in the biblical narrative, there's a couple of moments of hospitality that stick out. The first one that we find is in Genesis 18, as Abraham and Sarah are resting by the oaks of Mamre. And three strangers come near to Abraham, and he runs and he makes sure that they have enough food and enough drink. And somewhere along the line in the narrative, we find out that these strangers are the Lord coming to visit Abraham. Abraham gives them choice meat and drink, and then they give Abraham the news of Sarah with child. It's this remarkable interchange that happens out in the wilderness where the angels, the Lord gives Abraham news of a baby, and they receive food from Abraham. Another great hospitality text is found in the Gospel of Luke, as Jesus sends out the 70 in Luke 10, and he sends them out to the towns and places that he himself intends to go, and he gives them really specific instructions. He says, don't carry a bag or a purse or sandals, and greet no one on the road. And he tells them to look for people of peace. And if anyone there shares in your peace, stay with them. And he tells them to eat and drink what they provide. And he tells the disciples are going to announce that the kingdom of heaven has come near. And what I love about both of these texts, and I think they're examples of this throughout Scripture, not just these two, but what I love about these texts is that hospitality isn't a one-way street. Hospitality in this text, it becomes difficult to figure out who's the host and who's the guest. Both are receiving, both are giving. The lines are blurred. It's this mutuality that's taking place. The angels give Abraham the news. Abraham gives the angels food. The disciples receive food and lodging. Those with whom they share the peace receive the announcement of the kingdom come near, and illnesses are healed. So while my wife and I lived in Bellingham, Washington, which is near the Canadian border, just north of Seattle, And I was serving a small church there. And one day while walking the neighborhood, I noticed we have this rather large plot of land behind the church. It had never been used. And around this land were different communities. There was a residential community, there was a trailer park, and then there was an apartment complex that was run by Catholic sisters who, uh, uh, where the apartment complex hosted primarily migrant workers. So they're almost all Spanish speaking. And I was just wandering through the little property, and I wondered to myself, like, this could be a decent community garden. Thinking about the different um, communities that are represented. And so that evening at church, I just wondered, like, hey, have we ever thought about doing something with this land? And it was met with sort of mediocrity. People were like, maybe it's kind of it's not great soil. The next day, the doorbell at the church rings. And so I open the door and I meet a woman named Lindsay. And Lindsay is the community organizer at the apartment complex. She organizes events and after school programs for the children because most of the parents work well into the night. She was hired by the Catholic sisters to support the children. And so she said, hey, I'm Lindsay. I don't know if you know me, but like I noticed you have that piece of property. Have you ever thought about like maybe doing a community garden? Because it'd be something great for the kids to do. And many of these families are very low income. It could be a great resource. And I said, this is crazy. Like we just talked about this last night. I'll never forget it. She said, but you need to know, like, I'm kind of an agnostic. Like, I don't really know if I believe in any of this. And I was like, we're a small church. We'll take anybody. Don't worry about it. So the very next day, Lindsay and I at that conversation, we decide we're going to go ahead and connect later that week. And the next day, the doorbell of the church rings again, and it's neighbor Bill. Bill, who is my son's Boy Scout leader, whose house backs up to the property. And I'm guessing you see where the story's going. Bill says, hey, I'm a master gardener, and I just noticed this land, and I think about the different communities that touch it. Have you ever thought about doing a community garden? And I said, have you been talking to Lindsay? He's like, no. Who's Lindsay? Have you been talking to people at church? No, I don't. No, I haven't. I said, well, we just talked about this in church, and yesterday I met Lindsay, and he's like, well, this seems like we should do it then. So the three of us arranged to meet at my house the next day, and it's a Friday. And the doorbell rings, and Bill and Lindsay had arrived at the same time. And I greet them, and Bill says, hey, I grabbed a bottle of wine on my way out of the house. And Lindsay says, hey, I grabbed this loaf of bread because it's going to go bad. I figured we can eat it. And the three of us sat around a table. This minister at a church, this agnostic, and this professing lapsed Catholic. And we broke bread and we drank wine. And we dreamed about this community garden that now, 10 years later, produces thousands of pounds of food for the community. And what I love about this story, and what I love about sort of the hospitality that takes place, is that none of us are in control, right? That the church isn't the one who offers everything. The church has the land. And Lindsay and those in the apartment complex provide much of the labor and much of the stomach to eat the food. And Bill provides his expertise. That it's the shared mutuality and discovery of what happens when people are sort of paying attention and looking. So here's what I want to posit tonight. What if we saw our work as the very place to practice hospitality? I mean, what if we saw our colleagues or employees or employers? What if we saw our clients, those with whom we interact, as the very place in which and with whom we might be able to better practice hospitality? What if, along with the particular tasks of our work, we looked in our workplaces to create space for people to be more fully themselves? What if we allowed others to give that which we might need to be more fully ourselves? So I want to give us three sort of practical tips for practicing this ancient practice of hospitality. These are really simple, but can be very hard as well. Here's the first tip. What if we talked less and listened more? What if we embraced listening as an act of hospitality? And we cared more about understanding others than being understood ourselves? What if we cared more about what others have to share than meeting the need of us sharing what we want to share? I have a mentor who has this great phrase where he talks about the need for us to listen people into free speech. And what he means by that is that if we listen to those in our lives to the point where they trust us, that we're there to actually listen, we might get to the point where they're able to be honest enough and share who they are and where they're at and what they're experiencing. So I think one of the first acts of hospitality, I think we see this in Abraham in Genesis 18, and we see it in Luke 10 when Jesus sends out the disciples, is this greater capacity to listen. That's one. Two, um, what if we tried to practice receiving what others have to offer? For many of us Americans, I think, we love to give. We like the experience of giving to others and helping to meet needs, and that's good. But oftentimes, receiving from others is really, really hard. Maybe we don't want to feel like we're reliant on others, or perhaps it makes us feel like we're weak. And we live in a culture that idolizes self sufficiency and self reliance. We idolize our ability to manage and produce. Um, but I don't think we're made to live isolated, self sufficient lives. I really believe that humans flourishing, as God wants us to flourish, is not about everyone living these siloed lives alone, making do on their own without the help of others. I really believe that true human community, what God longs for the world, is that everyone brings what they have to offer to the table, and there's this receiving and giving, this mutuality that are able to share with gratitude. So maybe you need help on a project at work, and you really, really don't want to ask for help, but you need it. And there are others there to help. Maybe receiving that help is an act of hospitality. Or maybe it's simply receiving a kind word that someone has to offer. Maybe you struggle with someone giving you a compliment and you always have to give one back. What if learning just to say thank you and receiving that a gift that they have without feeling the need to give back in that moment? Or maybe you're constantly the one who's offering a listening ear and someone's willing to do that and to be that for you. I mean, a really simple practice of hospitality is just learning how to receive what others have to give us. It's probably the hardest, but remember that hospitality is never a one-way street. Hospitality happens in that space where it becomes difficult to figure out who's giving and who's receiving. So the third thing that I want to invite us into is a practice of paying attention. You know, Abraham and Sarah, they had to be paying attention to receive the three strangers. The disciples sent out by Jesus in Luke 10, they needed to pay attention to those with whom shared in their peace. One of the more popular verses about hospitality is in Hebrews 13, chapter 2. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers. For by so doing, some people have shown hospitality to angels without even knowing. The most necessary capacity, I believe, to hospitality has nothing to do with how good of a cook we are, keeping glasses filled, or making sure that the physical space is comfortable, or even being really friendly. I think the most necessary capacity to extend hospitality is the capacity to pay attention, to look at the world around us with curiosity and presence, and identify those who both might be needing something that we have to offer, but also might have something to offer us. So as we find ourselves in this time of year where we're thinking about resolutions, and we're going to be resolute to be better people through different disciplines of varying degrees, whatever your resolutions are, stick with them. But I also want to invite us, wherever we are, but especially in our places of work, to pursue the ancient practice of hospitality, to create the space where others might be able to be more fully themselves, to learn the mutuality of God's hospitality and this giving and receiving that takes place when humans come together and have something to offer one another. And it doesn't have to be hard. I mean, it can be done through really simple practices, practices of listening, of receiving what others have to offer and paying attention. Any one of these can be done, and they can be done in simple and beautiful ways.